Hi everyone, my name's Anson and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can touch up a wooden railing that has some scuff marks, has some paint dents. We're basically looking to kind of even out those dents and scuffs, and then we're going to paint over it. So let's go take a look and see what the project looks like, and then we'll talk about some of the supplies that you're going to need for this project. Okay, so here's what the project looks like. You can see we have this wooden railing, and we've got some scuff marks and some light denting going on across here and also on the corner and then also down the spindle. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to sand this down a little bit. I'm not just going to sand, right here. I want to sand into the good paint so that we try and create an even, smooth line and there's no break in the texture. So we're going to sand it down a little bit and then we'll go ahead and we will apply a fresh coat of paint and see how it looks. So let's go ahead and head downstairs and take a look at the supplies that we're going to need for this project. Okay, so in terms of supplies, I'm trying to keep it pretty simple for this project. I actually didn't go out and purchase anything. This is all stuff that I had here in my workshop, but you may need to go out and buy something depending on what you've got on hand. So what we're going to use is, I've got some eggshell interior paint that I've already made sure is very similar to the paint color in my house and already on the railing, so I'm going to use this for my painting. I'm going to use one of these sponge brushes. Could use a paintbrush, but I think I can be a little bit more detailed with this and avoid some brush lines and that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to be using for painting. I've obviously got a screwdriver to open the paint can, a stick to mix the paint, and then we also have some sandpaper. I have one sand block that I'm probably going to use a little bit, and then I've got some 150 grit sandpaper here, and then I also have some 220 grit sandpaper. You could get real detailed and you could make sure you're not skipping any grit levels when you sand, but I don't want this project to be perfect. I just want it to look better than it is. So I think with these two sandpapers and the sanding block, I think we'll be fine. And then finally, I have some glass cleaner, maybe Windex, and a microfiber towel just to wipe off the surfaces before I get to work. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to wipe it off. Then we're going to sand it down a little bit to try and even out some of the texture on there. I don't want you to see the dent texture, so I'm going to sand a little bit into the paint that's still good on there so that we get kind of an even finish. And then of course we're going to paint. So let's go ahead and let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to wipe down our surface a little bit with the glass cleaner and a microfiber towel. I like to use the glass cleaner instead of water because it does dry a little faster. Whenever you're cleaning your windows, you may notice that it dries real quick, and that's part of leaving a streak-free glass behind, and I like that for cleaning these surfaces so that I know that there's no water on them when I go to paint. Okay, so we've got that cleaned up. Now we're going to do some sanding. We will go back in with the microfiber towel for a little bit after we sand, just to make sure we get all that loose wood and everything out of there. So I'm going to start with the sanding block. I'm going to start with a little more grit. You see that this sanding block is a little used, so it might be good to have a new one, but I think it'll do just fine for this job. So let's see what it does. So you'll notice that I'm going into the good painted part a little bit because, again, I want to match that texture. I don't want there to be a dent here when I'm finished. See, I'm getting a little bit of peeling, so that might mean it's time for me to use one of my finer grit sandpapers on this area here. Just kind of feeling it to make sure that the texture is nice. It's pretty smooth there. Here I have some work to do on the corner. All right, let's jump in with some of the 150 grit. That's nice. That's a nice even texture right there. I can barely even feel the difference. That's what we're looking for. Now I've got a real big dent over here on the right, and I could try and just keep sanding that down, but that's really going to change kind of the whole texture of this. So you know, ideally maybe I could go in with a little bit of a wood filler or epoxy to kind of fill that in, but I'm not too worried about that. Again, this isn't trying to be perfect. I just want basically to not be noticeable unless you're looking for it. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. You know, that's pretty smooth and I'm almost happy with that. But since I do have the 220 sandpaper, I'm going to jump in and just do a little bit of sanding with that. This is a big sheet. I'm going to rip it a little bit to make it easier to work with. You'll notice that as I do this, I'm taking off some paint, so we're exposing a little bit more of the wood, but that's okay because again, at the end, that's gonna give us a nice even texture, and we'll be able to go in and sand a little bit once it dries if we need to try and smooth out if that texture is a little raised where we painted. All right, we're all sanded, so let's go back in with our microfiber towel and just get some of that loose sand grit off and we'll start painting. The towel's still damp, so I'm not gonna re-wet it. I don't want it to be too wet for this part, so nice and shiny. All right, we're fully sanded, so let's get this paint can open and get some paint on there. Since I've used this one before, I'm gonna mix it, but I'm gonna shake it a little first anyways. All right, we've got our paint can open up, so let's give it a little mix. So we have our paint opened up, so let's go ahead and we're just going to start to go very lightly. I'll pick this up. We'll start with just a little bit on the corner of this brush here, see how the paint lays on for us. I have to be careful, this can, you'll notice, is a little rusty. I don't want to get that into the paint. So let's go ahead and we'll start from this end. You'll notice that this first layer here is not completely covering up the wood color. That's because it's a dark wood color, and it might have been a good idea for us to use a primer. If I was doing this whole job from start to finish, this whole railing, I would definitely use a primer, but since it's a touch-up job, we're just going to use the paint, and we'll probably have to go over it a couple times here. Yeah. So I'm kind of trying to feather it in a little bit, getting some paint outside of the area that needs to be painted, and then I'm feathering that into that area so that we're trying to kind of match texture and color here. Because that wood is so dark, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a little bit of a thicker coat. I'm not going to brush it all off, and then we'll fix that when we sand later on. So you'll notice that this first layer is just kind of fully covered those dents and scratches. So now what we're going to do is we're going to wait for this to set. I might add a little bit more in here. We're going to wait for it to dry a little bit, and then we'll come back in with a second coat before we do a sanding. And then when we do our second coat, we'll decide whether or not we think we need to come in with a third coat. So you can see already, I've only been doing this for about 10 minutes. You'll notice that I'm already able to get that wood color covered up more because that paint has kind of settled a little bit. But I do want to let it dry, kind of not fully, but I'll probably let it sit for at least half an hour or so here before we come in with another coat and then do our final sanding. All right, so we're gonna let this dry and then I'll be back. All right, I'm back and I've let it sit for about half an hour or so. You could probably wait a little longer if you felt like you needed to. One little tip, if you want, while you're waiting, take your can of paint around the house if you've got same color walls as the paint you're using and touch up some tiny little spots that you see. You don't even really have to sand them. Just get them kind of touched up. That's how you can kill that time. So now we're gonna go back in with a second coat. So I've got my paint, I've got my sponge brush, and we're gonna basically do the same thing we did the first time. I wanna really try and get it covered up good. You can see, or I'm not sure if you can see, but you can see a little bit through the paint. It's looking a lot better than it was, but we wanna get it fully covered and then we'll go back in and sand any extra material off after we're done. What's really important when you're doing this, obviously, is making sure that you have the same color paint. If you can't find the same color paint, then you're probably gonna have to paint the whole railing. This is almost exact. I don't know if it's 100% exact, but honestly, I use it in a lot of areas of my house and I cannot tell after I've finished where I've used it. So, works great for us here. All right, so we've finished our second coat and I'm really happy with this. It's almost unnoticeable, any of the dings and scratches. There were a couple deep ones where I can still, when looking closely, I can still see a little bit of paint through it. So I probably am gonna come back with a third coat, but I honestly don't need to. I could go right in right now with my 220 grit sandpaper, just do a quick finishing sand, and this thing looks just as good as new. But I'll be back in a little bit for a third coat and then the final sand. All right, so I'm back for the third layer, and I don't even know if you can even see where the dents and divots were on this railing. It looks pretty good now. The only reason I'm doing a third layer is because one, that wood underneath is really dark, so it's showing through a little bit, especially on this side over here, the back side. And then also because those grooves, those divots were pretty deep, I want to get enough paint material in there to kind of match the level and texture of the rest of the railing. So we're gonna do a quick third coat, then we're gonna wait and we're gonna sand it down to finish it off. And just like with my other coats, I'm gonna feather it into the rest of the railing a little bit, just so that we're kind of matching our texture and color. If the paint were a little different color, although this one matches really well. But we're just feathering it, and you might get a few, if you're using a paintbrush, you might get a few brush marks. With my sponge, I get a few lines, but that's all gonna go away when we do our final sand. And with this third coat, like I said, it's pretty good. It's to the point where I can't even really see where those initial divots were, so I'm having to kind of spread out a little bit and just make sure that I get everything kind of covered and try and make it look even in terms of that level of material. All right, so that's it for our third coat. We're gonna let this dry and then we'll be back for our final sand. All right, so I'm back and the third coat has now dried. So you can see here is the railing. I did not come in and sand it yet. It's only been a couple of hours. So I do wanna wait like 24 hours before I sand it, but I am gonna call this project done. I probably will come back in a couple days and do one final sand. But overall, you can see, you can't even tell where those scratches and dents were. Railing looks nice and white and kind of looks like new. So I hope this helps you with your project. Just remember to get it nice and cleaned off, get it sanded, find the right color paint that matches the other paint you've got on there, and then put a few coats on and you can fix up your railings or whatever it is in your house that needs a little touch up to have them looking fresh and new. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel to see more DIY and gardening videos.